Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time. I'd love to kind of give an overview of Rise Together and then hand it over to you with some questions and kind of hearing a little bit about you, if that works well for you.
Sure.
Perfect. So first, I just really appreciate people watching these, whether it's live or on YouTube or Instagram afterward. I'm just so appreciative of people's support. For those who don't know, Rise Together was started because we all know that Los Angeles is in crisis, but it doesn't have to be this way. We as Angelenos can create lasting positive change in the city that we love, and a huge part of that is being involved in local elections. We're hosting these interviews because we believe that the 2022 municipal elections are really important. And we want to make them a little bit more accessible for everybody. So it's not part of our endorsement process or an indication of support or opposition to any candidate, just an opportunity for candidates to get to know our community and vice versa. So with that, I would love to start just with the most basic ground level question, which is, what does a city attorney do and how does that affect our lives?
Hi, for the audience, my name is Hydee Feldstein Soto, and I am running to be the next Los Angeles City Attorney. If elected, I would be the first woman city attorney in the 150-year plus history of the office. And because this is an open seat, it is a particularly competitive election. The city attorney is one of 3 citywide elected officials, the mayor, the controller, and the city attorney, and is a position provided for in the charter. I suppose that everybody has their own take on what the office does. From my vantage point, probably the single most important part of the office is that the city attorney is in effect the managing general partner of one of the largest public law firms in the country. So the office has 550 lawyers authorized. I don't know how many seats are filled in the pandemic these days, but it's 550 or so authorized, and another 500 plus employees. So that's, secretaries and paralegals and investigators and researchers and just non-lawyer employees. That means that you have 1,000 souls in the office with a budget of $140 million. That is a big job by anybody's estimate. And so the ability to manage other lawyers and to manage a practice and to develop the kinds of systems and procedures to stop things from falling into the cracks and organize an office becomes a critically important skill. It's not terrifically sexy. It's not a lot of courtroom drama. It's not a lot of press conferences, but it is in many respects the single most important part of the day-to-day job of the city attorney. The other pieces of the job are, you are the general counsel to the city. And that means everything from the city attorney drafts and has to approve as to form and authorization, every single piece of legislation, every resolution and ordinance, every ballot measure. When you see a ballot measure and you don't understand what it says, and then you see the legislative analyst summary of it, and it bears some, but not necessarily identical resemblance to the measure itself. Part of the job of the city attorney, in my view, is to draft measures that are comprehensible to the voters, and then to make sure that the summary accurately reflects everything that the measure does, so that the voters understand what they're voting on. City attorney is responsible for the forms of the indentures that raise our city financing, for the commercial contracts, and for enforcing the provisions of the charter, the state constitution, and the federal constitution. And finally, the city attorney as general counsel, of course, represents the city in litigation, either as plaintiff or as defendant, so that's civil litigation. And the city attorney is responsible for the administration of the criminal justice system to the extent of misdemeanors within city limits. So if it's a felony, even if it's in the city of LA, it goes to the district attorney. That's George Gascon. That's not the city attorney's job. And if it's a misdemeanor within city limits, then yes, the city attorney can choose to exercise prosecutorial discretion, can divert, can administer the criminal justice system, or can in fact enforce the law. The third part of the job that nobody talks about, which makes it different from private practice,
Mhm.
is that the city attorney is one of 3 elected officials, which means you have a direct relationship with the residents and constituents. People say to me, does that mean that you're our lawyer? And the answer to that is no. Okay, the city attorney is the lawyer for the city.
Mhm.
But as an independent elected official, the obligation extends beyond a private lawyer's, I will do whatever my client says, as long as it's not illegal, immoral, or fattening.
Mhm.
And you do have some obligation to your constituents to ensure that the city is acting transparently, with integrity, and with accountability. So those are the 3 things in my mind the city attorney does: manage the office, act as general counsel, act as an independent elected official.
Amazing. That is really helpful. I'm sure that will be also very helpful for people who aren't very familiar with city politics. And I'd love to get to know you a little bit better now. I'd love to kind of hear, what made you want to run and what are your big priorities if you were elected?
Um, let's start with why run. I'm a reluctant candidate. I'm not starting a political career at this point in my life. I used to say I'm not a politician, but as someone pointed out, you're running for office, Heidi. Of course, you're a politician. Um, but this is an office that I view as a job that I can do where I can give back and I can actually help fix some of what's wrong with the city. And it is not in any way, shape, or form a stepping stone to
Mhm.
a political career. I don't want to go to DC. I don't want to go to Sacramento. I've lived in Los Angeles since 1982. This is my home. And so, from my perspective, this is my effort to do something about the fact that our city is broken, that people are voting with our feet. I have like friends, hassles of friends who have moved to Park City, Utah, or Nashville, Tennessee, or Austin, Texas, or Ojai. I mean, people used to say to me, well, that's a state issue. No, it's not. People are leaving Los Angeles for other parts of California as well.
Mhm.
And so there's a part that's a push that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of what's broken with the city. And I do think that the city attorney can do a lot about it. There's also a pull. My dad passed away a couple years ago,
I'm so
and
sorry.
his life, nope, he was too much shy of his 98th birthday. He went exactly the way he wanted to go,
Oh.
lucid and still walking. But my father was a corporate lawyer by day and a do-gooder by night. And his death resulted in news reports from the Orange County Register to El Vocero, which is one of the largest Spanish language papers in San Juan, Puerto Rico, which is where I was born and raised. So as I read about my dad's life, and I recognized that arguably I have, something like a third of my life ahead of me, um, at least if genetics is any tell, I thought that I was not living up to my DNA. And running for this office is my effort to truly give back. Priorities. I'll be brief. Homelessness, homelessness, homelessness. And the city attorney can do at least 3 things about that. First and foremost is the enforcement of the competitive bidding procedures of our city charter in all respects, not just with the actual 20% construction cost of the Triple H money, but we ought to be doing competitive bidding procedures across the board. And the difficulty is that even though the competitive bidding procedures are embedded in the city charter, all too often it's honored in the breach. If you read the report on Monday that came out about the information and plea agreement on the LADWP scandal, at the heart of that scandal is a $36 million no bid contractual relationship with the lawyer who was representing the city. And it was as close to an outright bribe as anything I've seen alleged. Okay. Because what it was, the allegations in the information statement and the plea agreement, if true, okay, and at least one of the defendants has pled guilty and said they were true. The allegation is that the then highest ranking executive of the LADWP was offered a job at a salary of $1 million plus, and then a fancy car, if that executive helped push through a $30 million single bid, no bid contract for the benefit of a company run by this particular individual. So he was pushing a contract for his future employer of $30 million in exchange for a salary of $1 million plus a car. If that's true, that's kind of corruption and bribery 101. And therein lies the rub with no bid contracts. So the first thing the city attorney can do is enforce the charter. Make sure that everything goes through a competitive bidding procedure and the city is getting the best and most qualified bids. Second thing the city attorney can do. A lot of the issues with respect to our unhoused population have to do with the fact that we need mental health services and substance use services. It's, yes, there's a concept of housing first, but unfortunately, without supportive treatment and services, all too many people either trash the housing that's provided or wind up back on the streets anyway. So it may come as a shock. The city of Los Angeles does not have its own public health department. Unlike Pasadena and Long Beach, which have a public health department, the city of LA must look to the county of LA for public health services. And right now that's embodied in LAHSA. As the city attorney, one can explore alternatives to ensure that the city and the housing that's being built gets its fair share of federal and state block grants for mental health services, for medical services, and for substance use support. Substance use treatment, I should say, rather than support. And that's something else the city attorney can do. There's a whole litany of priorities, but from the perspective of homelessness, I've tried to focus on what the city attorney can do. The city attorney can't go out and build housing.
Yeah.
The city attorney can make sure that the contracts that are awarded for the housing that's being built are in the best long-term interest of the city and cost a little bit less, like maybe 90% less than the $2,000 to $3,000 per square foot that the city has been spending. If we can build barracks halfway around the world for 18,000 troops in 3 weeks, I'm quite certain that we can do something to build shelter more quickly, more cost effectively, and more compassionately for the people who are unable to care for themselves and are currently dying at a rate of 5 a day on our streets. That's not acceptable to anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought that up. To be honest, I feel like a lot of my questions were already answered in this conversation. But that's, I think, a really important thing to discuss is kind of how, it probably doesn't seem like a one-to-one correlation between how do you address homelessness as a city attorney, but that was a really helpful way to look at it. I also know a lot of the people in the Rise Together community and just around the city are really concerned about both affordability in the city as well as preventing crime. And I'd love to hear kind of how, as city attorney, you could address those issues as well.
Affordability of housing, okay, is really a question. And there's lots of perspectives on this. I will tell you that I'm on record as saying that I don't think that supply side upzoning works. Simply raising the bar on what can be built fuels more real estate speculation, and most for-profit developers, rightly so, okay, they're in a position where what they are supposed to do is earn a return for their investors. We, just like it's irresponsible of our elected officials to toss the problem of homelessness into the lap of a federal district court judge, okay, because they can't solve it, I view it as irresponsible to toss the issue of affordable housing and a safety net to create workforce housing for normal people into the hands of private developers. That's not their job. That's not their function. So upzoning is not the answer. Attacking the problem on every possible level, from shelter to bridge housing to permanent supportive housing. And honestly, a lot of the permanent housing needs to be for families with kids, These tiny homes with 2 beds, that's fine for a shelter. The studios and the 1 bedrooms that are being built may work for a lot of people, although a lot of folks who've been on the street don't really like the isolation of living alone. And it doesn't do much for the working poor,
Mhm.
for the families who, I mean, we have school children who, when school's in session, go to school from the streets. And we need to start building for them as well.
Mhm.
We need to be providing a safety net for all of our residents, not just whatever happens to be in vogue or whatever the latest viral hashtag is. In addition to priorities, you asked about law enforcement. I'd like to point out there's at least four law enforcement agencies operating within our city. There's the Los Angeles Police Department, there's the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, there's the California Highway Patrol, and there's the federal agents, okay? Everything from the FBI to ICE to the Border Patrol. Those are very different agencies, and how you would approach reform may vary depending on the agency. The city attorney's role really is more to have a relationship with the communities served within the city and to work with the police department and senior lead officers to implement community-based policing. I don't think there's anybody from the police department who objects to having a lot of the mental health services calls that are currently being handled, under the police with 911, because that's what's available,
Mhm.
and to taking those calls and putting it in the hands of trained social services and mental health professionals who can de-escalate the conflict
Mhm.
rather than treating it as an enforcement measure in all circumstances. And, no one from Watts to Woodland Hills to East LA to Venice wants a 911 call to result in an execution. I mean, no one wants that kind of violence, where what we're dealing with is someone who is experiencing a psychotic episode or needs some help. And so we need to find alternative ways to respond to those kinds of calls.
Mhm. That is very helpful. I appreciate you also kind of like lining up the different entities that are in the city. And one thing, just kind of taking it down to like a very local level, I know a lot, obviously, there is a lot of distrust in government for multiple reasons here in LA. Um, and I think one of those things that tends to fuel that is just that there is so much that's unclear about city code or city policies, where people are, getting in trouble for maybe like a vendor violation, like a vendor violation or something like that. I'd love to hear how, as city attorney, you could make city policies and the justice system a little clearer and more transparent for the people in the city.
I believe in data.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm a great believer that, yes, part of the city attorney's role is to enforce the law. I'm so sorry. That's my dog.
That's okay.
But enforcing the law has to be done equally and justly,
Mhm.
not just blindly. So, I mean, one of the examples that I give, and this is the first time I'll give it on tape, as far as I know, um, drinking out of an open container,
Mhm.
technically a misdemeanor. I would like data to know how many calls to the police there are about drinking out of an open container at fraternity parties at various college campuses and universities around the city, and how many times the police respond to that kind of a call with a warning or letting go or something versus an arrest, and
Mhm.
how many times the police respond to that kind of call when it comes from, a group of young high school kids on Slauson who happen to be Black or brown. And if there is a disparity in the enforcement, okay, then in terms of prosecutorial discretion, you ought not to be enforcing that law because it's having a disparate impact on communities of color. So we ought to scrub our penal code. We ought to make sure that we only have laws on there that A, are constitutionally enforceable,
Mhm.
and B, that we really intend to enforce equally. And my office, based on data, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, my office would do that.
Awesome. Well, that was really helpful. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I have loved getting to talk to you and hearing this conversation. I do want to quickly hand it over to you so that you can let people know where to find you. So your website or whatever.
As I like to say, I spell Hydee with a Y. Okay, so why Hydee? It's Hydee with a Y. So it's Hydee Feldstein Soto. And my campaign website is www.Hydee, the word for FOR, cityattorney.com. Please go to my website. Please leave any questions you might have there, or reach out. I'm very accessible. And I look forward to the coming months and to further conversations. Thank you so much for providing this forum to Rochelle and to Rise Together. And I look forward to more conversations in the future.
Me too. And thank you so much again for taking the time. And I look forward to speaking again in the future.
Take care.
Here, bye-bye.